Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we'll be chatting about Policy Horizon Canada's bleak prediction that the nation will have no upward social mobility by 2040, the difference between liberal and conservative platforms in Canada's 2025 election, FinCEN uncovering $1.4 billion in fentanyl cash, how politicians are letting China hijack our election, Canada's tax system financially attacking white male Canadians, and the US government blowing the lid off of COVID lies and corruption. All right, let's get into it. So first off, we've got Canada's 2040 forecast, a nation without upward social mobility. A Policy Horizons Canada report paints a dystopian picture of 2040 where upward mobility is virtually extinct. Hard work no longer leads to a better life, as education, housing, and career advancement are out of reach for most. Wealth inheritance replaces merit as the primary means of social ascent, creating a class-based aristocracy. Disconnected elites live in digital enclaves while the rest hustle to survive through gig work and informal economies. As trust in institutions collapses, grassroots co-ops emerge and civil unrest looms. So, what lessons can we draw from history to avoid or prepare for this projected future?
This is pretty wild. That report was nuts. People are going to be foraging for their food and spearing fish. Like, okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Okay. Not the Canada I remember. So I made a list and I just have some thoughts on each. So to protect upward mobility, we need to improve education and opportunity. So this is something we did through during World War II, post World War II rather. We had mass access to quality education. So this is important, but I think it's key that we prioritize decentralized skill-based education with less focus on degrees, more on trades and entrepreneurship. It's just things that'll bring us into the 21st century, basically. Ensuring access to housing and affordable living. You know, this is something every party says they're going to do, but the right way to do this is to cut red tape, incentivize private development, and end these zoning and all these very restrictive zoning laws that are in place. When you look at that, you really, unfortunately, today have only one choice. You have to go conservative versus liberal, because the liberal government right now is trying to implement $35 billion more spending to bolster housing, but it's just through more government agencies. So that's not the way to fix this problem. We need to limit wealth concentration via tax loopholes while lowering taxes on work, productivity, and innovation. So you can't, this is interesting because, you know, there's always this thing about wealth concentration. Now, successful people are always going to be successful and find a way to make money, and it's very hard to take money away from people that already have it. That earned it, right? And I don't even think we should ever look at that as an option. But when you give them opportunities like tax loopholes or stuff like printing all that money through COVID, this is how you have massive wealth transfers. So we have to be a lot more cognizant of that. This is I don't know if it's stupidity. I don't know if it's on purpose. But these are the bigger problems because, like I said, successful people will be successful. But you carve out a successful economy and society with a robust middle class. So when you have these massive wealth transfers, you basically fuck that right up. So for me, I think that's key. We need to rein in government overreach and bureaucratic expansion. So this is interesting. I think we need to find a way to cap the size of government. I think that's something we can implement today. So this is arbitrary numbers. But if you wanted to increase the government by more than 1% in a year, you need to pass something through the House and through the Senate. You know, I feel like that's the only way we can actually rein in the bureaucratic expansion, which under Trudeau increased by 43%, this direct federal workforce, which is bananas. That's so insane. And then in terms of government overreach, we just need to have a way to regulate the decisions they're making in a fashion that holds them accountable for things that are insane. I don't exactly know the best way to do that other than limiting the size of government, but I think that's a good place to start. Ensuring capital discipline, not crony capitalism. So one of the big things we need to do is end corporate welfare and let bad businesses fail. Like, it is what it is, right? Like, these things are too big to fail. To me, all that says is if you don't know the right people, you're going to fail.
The thing is that they didn't get to be too big to fail naturally, though, either. Is that right. They got too big to fail by the government subsidizing them in the first place and working hand in hand with them. And that's where, like, name me one monopoly on the planet that isn't formed by the government.
Yeah,
they don't exist.
Yeah, I would struggle to find one. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple out there, but the problem is you can't think of them off the top of your head, right? Moving on with the list, I've got a few more here. I would curb central bank overreach and inflationary spending. So we know the central banks work hand in hand with governments and that they're basically torpedoing this economy. They're playing a significant role in it. I don't care, how most people perceive this. It's banks, central bank, and the government working together to make money and print money whenever they want it, just basically digging us a deeper hole, which causes the inflationary spending. There has to be a way to enforce balanced budgets. To me, it's insane that our federal spending increased by 90% under Justin Trudeau to over $530 billion. But if you ask anybody, their life didn't get any better. It just didn't.
Well,
at least not at scale.
And even the metrics of success that these bureaucracies use, the very few of them they even have, they weren't met. So
No.
like with all of that, we doubled the amount of spending for these bureaucracies, but yeah, healthcare service and all of this kind of stuff, infrastructure didn't get better.
Nothing did. That's my biggest problem is we just lit this money on fire and expanded the size of the civil service. Next, we need to strengthen civil society and independent media. So for me, this is huge. You know, and you and I live in this space. We need to protect freedom of speech. This is huge. This is so important. And we need to reduce the size of state media, something you and I continually go on about. I think that's super crucial. You know, we need to transform CBC into basically C-SPAN, in my opinion. Embrace localism and decentralized solutions. So I actually think we should focus more on our own communities. And I think provincial leaders should have more power like they do in the United States. I think that would help sort of decentralize power from the top down. The further you are away from a problem, the less tapped in you are to the actual solution. You don't really know what you're doing, right? Guaranteed property rights and the rule of law. This is huge. I also would say that we need to bring back castle laws. If you come to my house, I get to shoot you in the face.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Like, done. We're done. Especially if this guy's foraging for food now and spearing fish and I have no castle laws. I don't think so.
Yeah.
And then we need to build a culture of resilience. And we need to build a culture of resilience, not dependency. And I think, you know, this could start with teaching financial literacy, perhaps, maybe some civic responsibility. It's funny. My dad said this the other day. He's divided on how he's going to vote. Actually, we had a really good hour-long conversation. I think I got him. But he's not in a swing riding. He's in a Aurelia. It's conservative no matter what you do, right? So, which is fine. But he even goes, this is my civic duty. I need to do this. You know, and it's interesting. You don't hear that from this generation. But you do hear it from theirs, which I appreciate. I also think we need to push entrepreneurship early and often onto people because I think that's the only way we rebuild things. So there's my exhaustive list.
Well, that's kind of how to avoid the situation of this two-tier society where we create an aristocracy. But diving a little bit more into this report on exactly what it outlines. So yeah, it says by 2040, there'll be more snakes than ladders in 2040. Actually, before I even dive into this is crazy because this report is coming from the government of Canada itself.
Which is so wild.
This is not a outside independent think tank or
it's
something.
Not a smear job.
Right.
Yes.
And so it says in 2040, upward social mobility is almost unheard of in Canada. Hardly anyone believes that they can build a better life for themselves or their children through their own efforts. However, many worry about sliding down the social order. So there's a couple different prongs that it highlights as to the big issues. So for instance, that post-secondary education will be no longer considered a reliable path to social mobility, mainly because the costs price people out. But then also another problem it highlighted was that the world is going to start changing so fast that these institutions won't be able to keep up with the change. They won't be able
we're already there.
Right. And so the stuff that they're teaching is outdated by the time you even graduate, right?
Yeah. You get several weeks these days on like marketing flat, tech flat, even medical flat.
Right.
Like you're talking max a couple months.
Right. And then, so another one is housing. So in 2040, owning a home is not a realistic goal for many. Most new homeowners get help from family members. It also says how like intergenerational mortgages will become a thing where it's like handed down from grandparents to kids to then grandkids. Then also intergenerational wealth. Pretty much the only way people will become wealthy is if their family gives them the money. Social siloing. This is one that I find really interesting because it's essentially the Hunger Games where you've got different districts that don't even really interconnect with one another at all. You even look, well, what do you think the 15-minute cities are?
That's what I was just going
right?
to say, yeah.
Like this is what these ideas are. They're districts. And so people rarely mix with others of different socioeconomic status. Algorithmic dating apps filter by class. And gated metaverses like real life offer few opportunities to meet people from different backgrounds. So like that's
dark.
It's like
it's
like a fucking Black Mirror episode.
Yes.
And then so also artificial intelligence, will just greatly diminish the value of human labor, especially in service-based fields, which we are a service economy.
Huge, like 90%.
Right.
Huge.
And so I think naturally too, because this is the thing, is when you look at something like AI, people said the exact same thing when the plow was created. Well, what are we going to do with all of these peasants?
Yes.
Right. And so, but different economies and things that, inventions that people necessarily haven't thought of, or work that will be needed to be done, it can't even be conceptualized now until the demand is there for it.
All we know is we always find a solution.
Right.
So far, historically, we've always found a solution.
But yeah, the craziest aspect of this report too that I did find was, pretty much it's saying there's going to be a 2-tier society: the rich people who live in this more digital universe and more AI focused city centers and all this kind of stuff. But then also just, your rural people like the District 12 and Hunger Games that are fishing and hunting for their next meals and foraging. But then also it even says in this report too that governments could just completely topple because they'll be seen as not being legitimate anymore, and they'll have no ability to actually enforce even the regulations and policies that they pass, because living conditions will become so bad for most people that they'll just be like, fuck you, I'm not listening to you anymore. But I think the best analogy for this is something that Aldous Huxley predicted over a century, just under a century ago now. It was like the 1930s when he wrote Brave New World. But, and I talk about 1984 as much as anyone because it is essentially a psychological handbook on how totalitarianism operates. But I think Huxley's Brave New World flies under the radar when it comes to these kind of dystopian predictions, because what he envisioned was, yes, this 2-tier society where you had the elites, that it was like this really sanitized version of life where kids were born in test tubes. Like the idea of having natural kids became unfashionable, and actually most people were disgusted by it. They were conditioned from birth to hate nature itself. Then also people would take a pill anytime they felt sad, which it was called soma. Then monogamy was completely forbidden, essentially, or not even like forbidden by force. This is the really interesting part about actually Brave New World, is that it was kind of everybody willingly engaged in the authoritarian nature of being like, oh, this is just how society operates now.
It's through choice, not force. That was what was different about it,
But then also in this book, there's the savage reserves, which is this like lower nature society. And that's what I think it's describing in this report by our own government again. Being like, so you'll have this extremely advanced society and then also this savage reserve, essentially. But what I found
wild.
But this is the thing, though, that like, I think where I look at this is like, okay, even if, let's say that's the society that comes about, this 2-tier world, I would rather live on the savage reserve. Like, because I think most people will have that jealousy or whatever of wanting to live in the capital and all this kind of stuff. But like, even there's this great point because the whole story with Brave New World is at one point a savage comes into the Brave New World, this new technologically advanced society, and he essentially rejects it. And at one point in the final chapter where he's talking to like the architect of this society, he says, but I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. And then he responds and says, in fact, I guess you're claiming the right to be unhappy. And he said, all right, then. I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. Like, I want the human experience.
Yes.
Because I don't want to live in this world. That's not what it means to be human.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that you may find a pretty high number of people that are in our position would choose to be in the savage realm versus this other society where everything's just sort of fabricated, you're medicated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's funny. I talk to my wife about this all the time. She would actually, if she had her way, we would go live off grid. You'd be living off grid. I go, there's no fucking way I can do that right now. But she was like, we were talking about some people the other day about They're like buying like 15 to 20 acres, building a bunch of homes on it. It's completely self-reliant, completely off grid, I should say. Like no cell phones, no data, no Wi-Fi, nothing allowed there, and like no electronics. Like obviously you have a fucking toaster. I don't care about that, but you know what I mean? Basically living sort of like they did in the 80s, you know, or the 70s. You'd have a central place where you could have some technology, but that would be it, like for work or whatever you needed. But basically you'd just be disconnected from all the noise. I think a lot of people really want that these days. Now, I don't think a lot of people want to forage or hunt for their food. Now, don't get me wrong. If they were given the skill set to do so, they might appreciate it. I think a lot of people maybe just don't have it right now. But I think a lot of people, you know, if we continue down this path, a lot of people would choose the savage world, man. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I don't like. I would 100% take reverting back a century or two to living standards than this world where, like, I mean, you even just look at it already with the way that people are in our current world, like the amount of depression, the amount of mental illness, even too, like the families fracturing, all this kind of stuff. Like even, okay, you consider in that brave new world, like nobody was born naturally. There wasn't such thing as a family in that advanced world.
Right.
And this is where you see things like CRISPR and all of this kind of stuff taking place, like the gene editing and artificial birthing and stuff. Like that world is trying to be created, but like, yeah, I don't want any part of it.
No, I agree. I mean, I'm not against technology so much as like I do think that we're overdoing it. And yeah, I could definitely appreciate a more simple way of life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's funny because I have kids. I'm going to have kids. I want to make sure they have all the opportunities that I had and more. I think most parents feel that way. So like, that's one of the deterrents. Like, I don't want to go isolate, but I would like to find a way to live far more disconnected. And I think that's actually like what I'm going to work towards over the next 5 years, you know, as we continue to scale up and things get better and our lives get better, is actually building a life that is still building a life that can still tap into all the resources that are available if you need them, but really spend a lot of time away from all the noise and the nonsense.
Well, I think too, this idea of like most people today, especially say the common folk, and I think people that listen to our podcast are definitely a little bit, they're just by nature of the things we talk about, they're a little bit more interested in large picture stuff. But
yes.
But your average person that doesn't think about anything other than going to their 9 to 5 and they're just biding their time until retirement and nothing else even comes into their mental frame.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I look at that and like that person, that average person, they think of life as like the goal of it is to escape suffering and discomfort and all of this kind of stuff, right? It's like, oh, I should just be as comfortable and materially comfortable as much as I possibly can.
Yes.
Where I think this was the thing that Dostoevsky nailed on the head, where he was saying that like people don't, it's not suffering itself that is bad, it's meaningless suffering.
Yes.
Like but when people have a purpose to suffer for, whether that's even just providing for your family or whatever, any of these bigger things, then people actually can come to enjoy suffering.
I enjoy suffering. So I think there's a big difference here, right? So you take the 9 to 5er. They're suffering every single day. They're weekend warriors. They're waiting for the weekend and waiting for retirement. That type of suffering is very different.
Mm-hmm.
Mine, I'll go through suffering because I know it will help me progress and advance. Even dumb shit like doing cold baths every day, like that kind of stuff. It's like, I want to suffer because I know it makes me better. So I choose the things that I'm going to suffer for. You know what I mean? I think that's the big difference is I think people feel the one subset of people feel like they're in prison suffering. Whereas for me, I feel like I'm suffering so I can get better and better and better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that everybody has the capacity to suffer the way that I suffer. It's just a matter of seeing it, understanding that you can have it the other way, and then executing whatever that strategy may be to get there.
Well, and that's I was talking to a family member about this the other day, you know, because even, okay, for instance, I think it was Ayn Rand who was talking about, like, you know, you shouldn't ever, like, suffering isn't a good thing. And well, the way that I look at that is like suffering is necessary for that growth you're talking about. The difference is whether it's voluntary or not, right?
Yes.
Whether you choose it. Like if suffering happens to you and you're not choosing it, then that does create trauma in a sense. However, if you choose the suffering, it can create transformation.
Yes.
And make you better off in the long run.
I agree with you. I think what's interesting though is, or what I would highlight is, there is legitimate suffering that you didn't choose. Getting beaten as a kid. That's legitimate suffering you did not choose. But going to work to a 9-to-5 every day that you hate, you're choosing that suffering. You're not being forced into it. So that's kind of where I think that people need to take a little more personal responsibility and choose the suffering that's good for them, not the stuff that's bad for them. But again, I think people fall into this sort of victim mentality in life. And I think people were sold a broken system where if you go do these things, you get to have the life that your parents had back in the boomers. And it's just not what it is today. So I think some people made the choice and then they've been sort of given a raw deal. But I guess the message is like, it's not too late and you should find a way to enjoy the suffering because it's going to happen anyway.
Well, and just to kind of wrap up this topic, that's kind of where I look at it, and I've just come around to this point of being like, when I talk about these things or what the future looks like, even a lot of people close to me and stuff will be like, oh, like, it's not even that I disagree with what you're saying. It's just hard for me to listen to because it makes me sad. And I'm just like, I can understand why that's the response. But at the same time, like, I look at this and go, yeah, but the way that you're living, it makes me like extremely sad or like afraid in a sense, like the idea of just, especially how we have been going as a society. Okay, you're going to work 45 hours a week at a job that you absolutely despise for 50 years of your life. Right. And then you're going to retire in essentially poverty and like, unless you have a good job.
Sure.
But say the average person, you're going to retire in poverty and then spend the final days of your life in like a dystopian retirement home. That's just like brutal to even imagine. And I go like, that's way worse than what I'm projecting.
Yeah. I think that what I would say is ignorance is a very dangerous position to choose because people are choosing it. I don't want to do that because it's uncomfortable and scary.
Right.
But the reality is, if you don't know, you can't fix it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand what's going on so you can take action and make your life better. That's really what it comes down to. And that's how we get it, because of there's been a collective ignorance that, maybe apathy is a better word to use, that Canadians have let happen at scale, which is why this report now exists.
Yeah.
This is a result of apathy and ignorance. So if we actually want things to change, you need to pay attention and take action.
Yeah, the analogy that I used in a recent video was it's like obesity. Like you're definitely on a really bad path, but if you just look yourself in the mirror and tell yourself that everything's okay and you're beautiful and nothing needs to change, then you're only going to get worse off. However, if you sit there and you go, okay, the decisions that I made were really poor and they got me to this point, and you then choose to start walking a different path and picking up different habits and having different behaviors, that's a very positive thing. So like, this is where, it's that paradox where I go like, me being like, we're all fat. We need to make some changes. Yes. Like our society is dying. Then like, that's not the negative message. The negative message is like, keep partying while it crumbles.
Is accepting it and saying everything's fine. You're like that dog in the meme when the house is on fire. Yeah. Everything's fine.
Yeah. Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode. If so, please consider leaving us a kind review wherever you're listening. If even just a quarter of our weekly audience did so, we'd instantly become one of the top-rated Canadian podcasts. We appreciate you helping us out, and now back to the show. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Election 2025, what the Liberals and Conservatives are promising this election. As the federal election nears, Canadians face a stark policy divide between the Liberals, led by Mark Carney, and the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre. The Liberals propose modest tax relief, continued high immigration, and green energy subsidies, while planning $130 billion in new spending. In contrast, the Conservatives promise deeper tax cuts, a massive housing build-out, energy expansion, balanced budgets, and trade renegotiations with the U.S. They aim to slash red tape, restore free speech online, and tie immigration to national capacity. With economic pressure mounting, this election asks Canadians whether they want more government or a fundamental reset of national priorities. So, what is the most important issue, and who do you think will win the next election?
So this is easy. I'm glad you asked this question. This election is all about rebuilding the Canadian economy. That is the only thing that matters because everything else fixes itself from there. Now, Canada's productivity is not even 70% of the US right now. Our immigration is rampant, and we're not bringing in people that are capable of improving our situation. Our GDP was 1.4% over the last 10 years, not 1.4% each year. That was over the cumulative increase over 10 years. That puts us last in the G20 and 36 out of 38 OECD nations. We're in real trouble. And we've got a government spending problem. We have some huge issues here. So rebuilding Canada's economy is the only thing that matters. So knowing that, what is the only way to rebuild our economy? We need to leverage our natural resources. So when you take our oil and gas and all of our natural resources together, in 2023, it accounted for 19.2% of our GDP. This is over $400 billion. This is the only lever that we have as Canadians that we can pull to fix this place. It is all we have. So here's the reality. Liberals have said they will not remove the oil and gas emissions cap. They will not repeal Bill C-69, which is the No More Pipelines Act, and they will consider using emergency measures to put in more green energy projects. Now, I don't think he will go that far, but just a reminder, green energy projects are expensive and inefficient, whereas the Conservatives has said they will repeal Bill C-69 and they will build the East Energy and the Energy East pipeline and the other ones going north. They will also remove the oil and gas emissions cap so that we can fully realize our energy potential. They also said that they will find ways to actually diversify by building a national energy corridor. So what they'll do is increase our infrastructure so we can actually diversify our trading partners. This makes us less reliant on the United States. This is the only way that we fix this country, is by driving up our GDP, leveraging more of our natural resources, and improving our economic situation. There are other things that matter, but if you don't do this one thing, everything else is fucked. So the only party that's doing it are the Conservatives.
Right. Well, okay. Even just back to that last topic, you have to imagine that, okay, if our own government is saying, hey, if we continue going down this exact road and this is where it leads, and the Liberal Party wants to continue walking that path, doing everything like the government spending,
yes,
not using our fossil fuels, all of this kind of stuff, you have to imagine that they want that world.
Yes.
Like they're working towards it.
They want this 2040. This new 2040
right.
agenda.
Yeah. Well, and that is what the 2030 agenda largely was, I believe.
Yeah.
Was, okay, like, because look, the Laurentian elites of Canada, right, in Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto, these essentially the power centers of Canada when it comes to both policy, also even media, all of this kind of stuff, they've definitely been pushing for that. I mean, even, right, you've seen, okay, the Globe and Mail is partnered with the Century Initiative, which is the 100 million population by 2100.
Yes.
So, okay, they're essentially shipping in people that will be okay living into this world. That's why they look at refugees, right? And so much. But what I find really interesting is like, okay, so you have these two options between the future of Canada. One, where we try to correct course, and I think we can. I'm not a doomer in the sense where I'm
very optimistic.
Where I think as long as we start making the right choices, then we can actually change course.
Yes.
But you look at okay, who is the people that are still, who is going to win the election? Now, I think we're being Kamala Harris, especially with the polls and all of this kind of stuff. Even to, you saw that we were hitting records for voter turnout early in the election, like by millions.
Almost.
It was like 1.7 million more than last election.
Yeah, totals like between 7.2 and 7.9 million Canadians.
Right.
That's huge.
And so people don't rush to the polling station to uphold the status quo. Like, so I think that a lot of that is going towards we want change. Even to, you look at, we've covered it before with the difference between the crowd sizes at Poilievre's rallies and stuff like this. Like, it's really easy to manipulate media and all of this to show support for a certain candidate or party. It's really hard to do that in the real world. and
Yes,
all
public
the
sentiment,
real and all the real world support is going towards the conservatives. However, I do think it's really interesting the three demographics that are still supporting the liberals. So first, the most ardent supporters of them is rich old people, boomers,
Yes.
that won't live to 2040 and have to deal with this two-tier society. They've also got extremely rich off of the asset inflation, the housing prices and all this kind of stuff, because they had their mortgages paid off before the housing prices went
Yes.
through the roof. And so now they're just sitting on what they feel is a gold mine. And so, yeah, why would they? And you know what? This is one of those things where I don't even actually have an issue with somebody voting in their own interest.
No.
Like, but just don't tell me that I'm bad for wanting my own interest and that you're so virtuous and you're doing this because you're so compassionate and empathetic towards society.
Oh, yeah, just be honest. Don't give me your bullshit.
Right.
Be like, well, son, I know you need to vote conservative because your life's kind of fucked. And he goes, but mine's pretty good and these people did it for me, so I'm going to vote for them. I go, disagree with you, but cool. Got it. Can at least respect it.
Yeah.
Don't give me this whole elbows up. We're doing this because we're virtue signaling. Like,
yeah, we're doing this to save Canada.
That elbows up thing is it's just so cringy. And honestly, I bet 9 out of 10 people you ask will be like, I don't know what it means. You have no idea. Not a clue.
Well, it is funny. Have you looked at the videos of the lines outside
it's
of the
cringy. It's so cringy.
But also, it's so hilarious that this is the party of diversity, and then you go look at the people that are lining up to vote for them or at Carney
72-year-old
rallies,
white women,
and it's just all
okay.
But then, so that's one demographic that supports them over, like, majority wise. Again,
Yes.
This is what, like, I'm generalizing here, and I've been doing this a lot recently when I talk about this kind of stuff online, and you inevitably get people, or even I've seen comments on past episodes on our podcast of people going, well, I'm an old person that does pretty well for themselves, and I'm voting conservative. It's like, okay, like, even if we're talking like 60% of that demographic, so
Yes.
like the exceptions don't disprove the rule.
Correct.
But okay, so old rich people. Then I think the other demographic is the woke social justice university kids. Their vote is essentially split between the NDP and liberals. But I think that what I've seen a lot of the sentiment, because I watch them, because I try to figure out what they're thinking. But a lot of them are actually saying like, oh, it's so funny to think about their mind. They go, oh yeah, I really want the NDP and I want to support the NDP, but we need to make sure that Poilievre doesn't get his majority. So I'm voting liberal this time around. That's what I see a lot of these types doing. But you look at them and I go, okay, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out the psychology of these people. And I think for sure that they are just the types that if you picture them, they feel like they're drowning, they're in despair, they're depressed kids, they're highly erratic, but they're like the person drowning in the swimming pool who doesn't actually want to be saved. They're just going to drag anyone around down with them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's them. And so I think there's a really dark aspect of their psychology where they actually want to see society burn, because they're so envious of people that are successful and competent and actually have independence and all of this kind of stuff, that they just want to see that taken. It's the whole like tax the rich idea. Like, I don't think any of them actually believe that things are getting better for the downtrodden by more taxes.
Well, no, not if you
want
explain it.
They just want to. I don't even think it's that. They can't even argue how that works. But
that's what I mean. If you explain it, they
right.
go, oh yeah, right.
But I don't
maybe I'll
think,
put this sign down now.
But see, that's the thing, is I don't think that's even what they really want. They just want to see shit taken from the rich people. Like,
I think there's a combination of two things. I agree with you. I think that there are exactly those people, but I also think that when you're young, you're more idealistic. And because you don't have much, you think everything should be equal. And then you believe sort of more in a socialist, communist perspective. Not that you want everybody to take everybody's shit, but because you don't have. So what I'm saying is, I think in many cases it's malicious, but I think in some cases it's actually just broken idealism, because I think that's what happens at that age.
I would agree with you if you didn't have 10 years of evidence that is not working, because these people, they only want more of it now.
Well, the thing is, we're talking about college kids that are 20 that don't have 10 years of experience. Last time they were like 10 years ago, they were 10.
Okay, even the last 4 or 5 years, things have definitely got harder for them, whether it's even the grocery store prices, all of this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
They have evidence that these policies are not working. They have everything they would ever need to make a logical and rational decision, but I don't think they're making logical and rational decisions.
I agree with you, but I do think that there's still this cohort of people that take in mainstream media and don't believe things that you and I say. They just go, well, they're both white supremacists, so everything they say is nonsense. I go, what? Okay, but objectively, it's not the truth. I just think that there are. We're kind of arguing over nothing. I just think that I don't think they're all bad. I think some of them are just young and dumb.
I think they're terrible people. But and then okay, so you've got the old rich people, the young socialists, and then I think also the only last demographic that is supporting the liberals is middle-aged women that have been so heavily propagandized. This is actually even, I was having a conversation with a family member recently about it, and they were talking about, oh yeah, I don't know which way to go and all of this kind of stuff, and I need to think about my daughter and her reproductive rights. And I go,
what?
That's not even on the table.
It's vocally not on the table.
But this is the same thing. I remember having a conversation with this person like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And they still were, that's the only thing going on in their mind is like they genuinely have been propagandized to the point that they believe if conservatives ever get into government again, that they're going to turn into the Handmaid's Tale instantly. And they're just going to be force bred and they're not going to have any abortions. This is what I mean, though. This is
Sorry,
like,
I should laugh, but it's preposterous.
You should laugh because
Yes.
it is preposterous.
Yes,
but they've been propagandized into believing that.
I agree. You know what's funny? So like my sister, she's 42, 43, so a middle-aged white woman. She never listens to this podcast, so I can say anything I want. Yeah, we get along just fine, but she's very liberal, and we've had conversations, and she'll see my perspectives because I know how to rationalize these things and explain them and not get too heated or anything like that. But she didn't come around for Easter. But my father was telling me like, yeah, your sister's really, really concerned about the election and blah. She knows what I do, right? So she knows her ideas would be challenged around me. So she won't even show up. She's not even interested in hearing any of it. And then I heard one of my buddies messages me today. It's like, hey, your sister's kind of going off online on me. She's got like Trump derangement syndrome. I'm like, yeah, she's probably sounds accurate. He's like, I'm ripping her apart with data and facts. I think I can win her over. I'm like, not a chance, but good luck to you. She's, like I said, I love my sister, but she's a perfect example of somebody that even when you give them the information, it doesn't comport with the narrative they've decided is real. They are over-identified with their opinions, and there's almost nothing you can do about it. So they're just kind of, I hate to say it, but it's kind of a lost cause demographic.
Well, and I think there's also another psychological factor here at play with this group where, okay, a lot of these types, both the social justice warrior types and the, say, middle-aged women, especially the ones that don't have a family of their own, because I do think
she doesn't have a family of her own.
Well, a woman's value system completely changes when kids are brought into the world. However, with that, I think they've spent the last 10 years calling anyone that's a conservative fascist.
Yes.
Anyone far right, all of this kind of stuff. And it's the same thing as, say, it's the exact same psychological trap as the unvaccinated.
Yes.
They scapegoated them. They said that not only do I disagree with these people, but these people are evil. And so therefore they would, in order to ever vote conservative, they would also have to get over that mental hurdle in their mind of going, oh, the last 10 years that I've spent vilifying these people.
Yes.
Oh, they're actually not this
I
thing.
lose too much of my identity, which is, it's interesting. That's actually what I think happened through COVID too, is people weren't willing to challenge a lot of the vaccine stuff if they'd taken it. And this just is what it is. My opinion is because if they do that, they have to pull a thread that they have to knit this whole sweater with, because they go, well, the media said it was good for me. The government said it was good for me. My doctor said it was good for me. My parents said it was good for me. So if it wasn't, well, now I have to go challenge everything that they've ever told me. And now it'll shatter my belief system. And I'm like, yeah, unfortunately, yes. And I don't think people are willing to do that.
I agree, but it goes a step deeper, because it's not only did everyone lie to me, but it's also, oh, I was the baddie.
Yeah, fair
because
enough.
I was helping, I was scapegoating, I was telling my relative they couldn't come to dinner because of this.
Yeah. That's additionally good point. Yes.
I was calling that person a fascist.
Yes,
and
I don't think people know what that word means.
They don't.
No,
they don't.
Just...
But that is that thing is they have to. It's not just that they have to realize they were lied to. It's that they have to realize that they were enforcing the bad shit.
Which is interesting because okay. So I know we got to move on because we're just kind of going on this topic, but when someone through COVID took the opportunity to have authority over others, it's because they're not used to having authority. They're beta type characters or below. So those are the types of people that are going to have a much harder time admitting they were wrong and admitting that one time when they took authority, that was the wrong thing to do. And they actually got this, they got it all wrong. So it's the people that actually engaged in it are the exact type of people that will never admit it to themselves that they were, you know what I mean? Like, I admit when I'm wrong all the time. I don't give a shit. Dude, constantly. I do it like over anything. I try to take responsibility for things that aren't my fault. I just always do. I just feel like, well, I could have done something different. That's not the type of people that took advantage of those opportunities. These are weak people. They're not going to change. I said, like to what I said before, it's a lost demographic.
Well, and that's something Peterson even noted about the people, especially in Toronto. Like, I do think the city types and all of that, especially these, higher educated types as well too. It's funny to say that. I would say, instead of saying higher educated, these university types, I'd probably just say better trained. But
works.
These people, they feel generally powerless, and they, the number he put on it, and it's a little bit arbitrary whether, give or take, but he was saying that, 30% of people would have been perfectly happy living in permanent lockdowns if that gave them the moral right to tell people to mask up and social distance and do all this.
It said 30%. I would say it's even higher.
Yeah.
So I would flirt with as much as 50
because they just felt powerful for the first time in their life.
Exactly. It basically was Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah.
That's what I called it. I was like, oh, what's happening here? Everybody's got blue hair and everyone's yelling at me. I think I could punch all these people out though. The fuck is this? All right.
No, 100%.
Today's podcast is brought to you by The Tallowed Truth, the real secret to better skin. Most products aren't designed to heal your skin. They're designed to keep you buying more. More dryness? Use this moisturizer. Now you have redness? Add this toner. It's a never-ending cycle, but real skincare doesn't create dependency. It restores balance. And the best way to do that is to feed your skin what it actually needs. The truth is, you shouldn't put anything on your skin that you wouldn't put in your mouth. That's why I use F-Bomb from The Tallowed Truth, made from grass-fed, grass-finished tallow with honey and frankincense. It's hormone-free, antibiotic-free, steroid-free, GMO-free, and vaccine-free, because I know that's important to a lot of you. And here's why we love them. They're a freedom-first brand that supports Blendr News and everything we stand for. And with a 30-day money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose. Try it today at thetallowedtruth.com/blender and use code BLENDR, that's BLENDR, for 15% off all products, including bundles that are already discounted.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Canada's involvement in a global drug crisis. FinCEN uncovers $1.4 billion in fentanyl cash. The U.S. Treasury has uncovered $1.4 billion in fentanyl-linked transactions, with Canada now implicated as a key player in the global fentanyl trade. Canadian companies are sourcing precursor chemicals, laundering cartel profits, and hosting shell corporations tied to Chinese triads and Mexican cartels. Ontario and BC are emerging as financial hubs for this deadly network, while law enforcement lags behind. This isn't just street crime, it's an industrial-scale, white-collar death economy. Canada's inaction is enabling a public health disaster and national security threat. The fentanyl crisis isn't just imported, it's embedded in our economy, and it's time we stop playing innocent. So, should the fentanyl crisis be treated as an act of warfare against North America?
Yes, in effect, it's asymmetric warfare, right? And there's a couple of things when I gave this some thought, I was like, okay, why is it warfare? Well, for starters, you have massive death tolls. So you're looking at over 100,000 overdose deaths annually in the United States. You throw in, Canada's 10, 15,000 as well. So it's pretty significant. That mirrors the impact of hostile actions, in my opinion. Synthetic opioids are being funneled deliberately, often via hostile states or transnational crime groups. So again, you've got illegal action bringing this in intentionally. And also the psychological, social, and economic destabilization mirrors traditional warfare outcomes. So pretty much any way you look at this, that's exactly what it is. But here's the thing. I would argue the difference between traditional warfare and this situation, I would argue that Canada is nearly as complicit as China at this point. Mm-hmm. We are making the drugs, we're distributing the drugs and laundering the money, and it's all made possible by our government's policy. So that's the one contrast or the one difference I would highlight.
Well, yeah, and again, we've even seen, right, with Trudeau, he took a private meeting with one of the essentially one of the heads of these triads in Canada, Paul King-Jin, who just had free reign in Canada. He was involved in commissions. He was given standing at commission so he could cross-examine witnesses.
Which is bananas.
He was caught in, I believe it was Panama. He was using a false identity, and then they denied him entry, sent him back essentially to Canada, and the CBSA just like waved him through. There was no investigation, anything. And so you just go like, how is this guy getting through? And even actually, this is really interesting, right? Okay, so you think, okay, this guy is tied, Sam Cooper's tied him and this whole operation to the Chinese Communist Party. And even that American Made, okay, let's get outside of China for a second. That American Made movie, remember that? Where it was Tom Cruise. He played the pilot, and it's based on a true story.
Yeah.
And how at the end of the thing when he
didn't
gets
love
arrested,
how that ended. Otherwise, it seemed pretty cool.
Right, and at the end of the movie, he essentially calls Clinton and is just like, when he's getting arrested for running all of these drugs and money laundering and this kind of stuff, then he's just like, he's telling the cops, he's like, oh yeah, you guys are going to be letting me go in an hour.
He did offer to buy them all caddies. They turned him down. Stupid. He's like, you guys should have taken the caddies.
Yeah. And so I look at that as it's probably a very similar scenario. Okay, if this guy's taking private meetings with Trudeau,
yes,
not that he's necessarily calling Trudeau himself, I don't know, maybe, but like, okay, you get sent back in Panama, you get red flagged, and then you're just like, all right, well, I'm just going to call my guy in the political realm.
Definitely 1 degree of separation, but that's all.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
like that speculation, obviously, I don't know exactly what was happening behind the scenes, but
something to let that
you
happen.
just go, if any normal person went through that scenario, like, I mean, hell, you look at the freaking border security that we have to go through. Like, dude, I can't even take on a thing that like a jug of
100 milliliters
a jug
or
of
something.
water that's like a little, a little bit too big, and that's going to get me like completely searched and all this kind of stuff. And this guy's just getting waved through when he's caught using false identities, and he's known to be linked to these organizations. But then also too, I did that video, and it's on our Substack that anybody can go to check out. It's about 10 minutes long, but yeah, the amount of money that is going around, like this is a $1.4 billion in this fentanyl linked transactions, but like that's a drop in the bucket to what we are laundering through our casinos and our banking systems every year. And actually another thing that Sam Cooper reported and highlighted as well is I think this is where, especially where we started getting the target of America on our backs, is that they found when they were arresting triads and cartel members in America, they would obviously go through their phones. Who are they texting? Where's their commands coming from? What's the chain here? And they always found that the chain was going back to Canada. And so I think for sure that that's exactly why we're on Trump and America's essentially in their sights right now.
Yeah, I mean, you know what's interesting too? I was just thinking while you were saying that is, go to China and see how many white people are doing well.
Right.
There's no white people infiltrating their government. There's no white people having meetings with Xi Jinping. I should say white people, Canadians is what I mean. These things don't exist. They've completely isolated us, but we're completely open to them. So that it's just weird to me that we've, diversity is our strength. Sure, but we don't have to have...
They gave him the death penalty. Who was that guy? Schellenberg or something?
Oh, yeah.
2015, 2016?
Yeah. It's something close to a Schellenberger. That's sort of close to the name. That's not exactly what it is. But what was interesting about that is that escalated very quickly. That was because there was a diplomatic row. This guy was in on a drug crime, was doing time, was going to get out. And then there was some diplomatic row between Canada and China. So like the same week, they're like, yeah, you're getting the death penalty now. See ya. China actually leads the world in death penalties.
Right.
They kill more people every year than every other. I always thought it would be Iran. Not the case. It's wild.
Yeah. And so it's funny because like even I'll see sometimes too, like you cover something like that. People will go, well, they're drug runners. Like, what do you expect? Like, are you really that upset about what's going on in China when these people get caught dealing fentanyl and this kind of stuff? And I go, no, that's not necessarily what I'm upset about. I'm upset about the complete double standard here that you've got Chinese narcos and criminal organizations that are running billions upon billions of dollars through our and fentanyl, killing people on the streets, all of this kind of stuff, operating completely freely in Canada, and then vice versa. Like, look at how they're treating the same issue over there. Not that I want it to be completely weighted. Like, I'm not saying we should go and give every single one of these Chinese narcos the death penalty or something, but we should at least revoke their citizenship and get them the hell out of this country.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. So the guy's name is Robert Lloyd Schellenberg. It was in It was in 2019, and I think it may have been connected to the Huawei debacle. I think it may have been. I think those because it was some diplomatic row that was pretty significant,
right?
And they're just like, done. Like, what? Yeah. So it's I don't know. It is what it is. It's a whole mess. I don't think that we necessarily need to be over there infiltrating their country either. I just think it's interesting to highlight the contrast, right? We're just like this weak. What would I call us?
Pussies.
Yeah. Good for me.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Silence is Surrender, how politicians are letting China hijack our election and our democracy. 2 years after evidence of Chinese election interference rocked Canada, the silence is deafening. Intelligence agencies confirmed that Beijing worked to install a liberal minority in 2021, yet today this foreign subversion barely registers on the campaign trail. Why? Because politicians fear losing votes in CCP-influenced communities, from intimidation of diaspora voices to replacing disgraced candidates with CCP-linked figures like Peter Yuen. Backed by Mark Carney, the political class is caving. Experts warn that Beijing's strategy of control is working. This isn't diplomacy, it's appeasement. If cowardice prevails, China won't just interfere in Canada's next election, they'll own it outright. So, should Canada ban CCP-linked candidates or organizations from participating in its democratic process?
Yes, until we can fix this problem, yes, 100%, because I think national security should come before political correctness, essentially is what this comes down to. Foreign influence in our elections undermines our sovereignty and democracy. Intelligence confirms that we've had direct interference in 2019 and 2021, and if I remember correctly, it was at least 11 MPs just in Ontario. Then when you racked up a BC, I think it was closer to like the high 20s. So it is a significant problem. And I think when you allow these CCP linked actors in to continue influencing our elections, it just sort of legitimizes the foreign interference more than anything. We also know that diaspora communities are being exploited and intimidated. So we know all these things are happening, right? So I just believe democracy without integrity is just not democracy at all. So yeah, I mean, nix it, done.
Well, what's crazy is it's such a web too, right? Because, okay, if you look at this, if let's say you wanted to completely take over a country's election system, you would have to just look at a few key ridings or places. Like, for instance, okay, if let's even take it outside of Canada for a second here. If you wanted to flip America, you're not going to put all of your resources and time into trying to get a Democrat elected in Texas.
No.
Like, it's just not very politically viable.
Right.
You'll put all of your resources into the swing states that can go either way,
Yes.
and then you'll go, I want to nudge it that way.
Yeah, you're more going to send them to Georgia than Texas.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the exact thing that we're seeing happen here, where, okay, you even look at, like, Vancouver, I think, is completely compromised by the Chinese, both high-end business, like CCP affiliated businessmen, also the triads, but then also in Markham. And you go, okay, so what's something that's going on in Markham currently? You've got Joe Tay, who is running as a conservative, and he was the one that China has a bounty out on, $1 million bounty. And Paul Chiang was the guy that was like joking, but also at the same time, like, there was no like punchline there. Really,
No.
He's saying to a room of Chinese media, like, and telling, like, essentially for them to print, being like, oh, if you kidnap Joe Tay, you could take him to the Chinese consulate for $1 million. And so you look at that and you go, okay,
Kind of surprised no one did it.
yeah.
Honestly, $1 million is a reasonable amount of money.
Well, okay, look at how bad.
I don't condone it. I'm just surprised.
Right. And well, look at how crazy things are in Canada right now, because, okay, not only did somebody just joke about that, but now, as of yesterday, Joe Tay has said that he isn't going to be campaigning in public anymore because he feels so threatened.
Right.
And actually, I think it was Sam Cooper did a piece on this, and I believe like intelligence agencies also were saying something along the lines of like, yeah, like there's serious threats out for you right now. And so you look at that. Okay, Markham is very heavily Chinese as
Yes.
far as just the groups living there. Markham is also a hub for these crime groups. If you actually look at, again, talking back to that last topic where the cell phones were lighting up, a lot of them are Markham, and that's where they're running these money laundering operations out of. And then also that underground casino bust that happened a couple years ago where they were running compromat missions, essentially, where they were it was like a brothel and illegal gambling, and they would invite Canadian politicians, and both Toronto police and CSIS believed that Canadian politicians went into those illegal underground casinos and essentially prostitution rings, got caught on camera doing illegal shit, and now these groups have damning materials on them that they can blackmail them with. And so you look at that and you go, okay, yeah, that makes complete sense as to why the Liberal Party would not step on these people's toes at all if these people have been
leveraged. They have leverage over them. You can't do anything about it. It's just so deep. This just runs so deep. It's such a mess.
Yeah. So I think this, going back to the original question on this topic, we need to have a foreign agent registry.
100%.
Two things is we need a foreign agent registry if you are at all tied to a foreign government, especially a hostile one. Like, this is what's so crazy to me is, like, for 40 years from the 1950s until the 1990s was the Cold War, and pretty much the entire world was focused around Western world versus communism.
Yes.
And then just because the Soviet Union, obviously they were the head of the snake at the time, but then after that we were just like, oh, now China's completely fine, as if we pretended that they're not also a communist power. And of course, if they're still operating on that ideology and still want to overthrow capitalism internationally, then yeah, of course, like, why would we ever think, like, let our guard down?
That was, I think, the biggest weakness, or the biggest problem that came out of the Cold War is after the West won, quote unquote. They're like, oh, everything's done, we're good to go.
Yeah.
But everybody in the East that still had the same agenda. This was not about winning property. This was not about winning a religion. This is about ideology. They were just more determined. So China was basically left alone, and they infiltrated through several different ways. They're doing a great job. They're winning.
Somebody should do a documentary on that, Jonathan.
They should do a documentary on that, Liam.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Canada's tax system is engineered to penalize white male Canadians. According to the federal government's own data, recent immigrants receive 205% more in Canada child benefits than native-born citizens. Wealth is being actively redistributed along racial and gender lines, with white Canadians, who aren't even the highest earners, used as the benchmark for state-engineered equity. Men, despite paying a disproportionate amount of income taxes, receive just a fraction of benefits compared to women and gender minorities. This isn't policy, it's ideology. Framed as compassion, it's actually a financial system built on punitive identity politics. As food insecurity and economic stagnation rise, equity is revealed not as justice but as controlled demolition of a nation. So, how does the government justify race-based wealth redistribution when white Canadians aren't even the highest earners?
Well, ultimately, the government doesn't justify these policies with hard numbers. It justifies them with a narrative, right? That's kind of what this comes down to. It's not really about lifting people up. It's about reallocating power under the guise of progress. It's very liberal. You know what I mean?
Actually, it's anti-liberal.
It's very today's liberal.
Yeah.
It's very today's liberal government. That's what I meant by that. Sorry, you're totally correct.
So communist.
Yes. I mean, look, in a just system, fairness means equal opportunity, not government enforced outcomes based on race or gender. It's my opinion that this is just simply masking the erosion of meritocracy, and it's ruining this country.
Well, yeah, I like, and this is one of those things where people would just say, like, okay, well, you know, these benefit programs are designed, like, you don't get approved for them dependent on your race. However, the way that I'd put it is like, okay, if you have a system, if you build a system that goes, I'm going to take from X, which is productive people, and I'm going to give to Y, which is unproductive people or people in poverty, and then I also am simultaneously bringing in people from the other side of the world that fit the Y category,
yes,
that aren't productive. And actually, this is one of those things where, okay, the population of the new immigrants that we've brought in over the last 10 years, again, this isn't all of them. It's just the rule, not the exception. However, they have a higher degree of single motherhood and also larger families. And so you go, it makes complete sense. And so this is just mathematics at the end of the day of just going like, yeah, if you have, a system that takes from X and gives to Y, and you bring more people in that fit Y, then of course this is going to happen. And like, I look at this and go, what's crazy is like now people will fight it and argue that this isn't the case, but you're like, this is what they've been saying they want to do for 10 years, equity along diversity groups, right?
I don't think people really truly understand how that materializes sometimes. I think they like it. It's a luxury belief that people don't truly understand how it comes to life.
Right.
And now that we're seeing it, they're like, no, that can't be right. Oh, you don't agree with the strategy. How did you think it was going to happen? And that's the problem with people parroting, these slogans and honestly just reading no deeper than the headline. This is where we are now.
Right. Oh, I wanted people to be equal. And you're like, well, no, this is what this means is designing a system that takes from X and gives to Y.
It's very double speak. It's like, you talk about this a lot, but like your Orwellian speech from 1984, how you say one thing and mean the opposite, right? That is what has happened through liberal policy over the last decade. And it's not just them, there's other governments doing the same thing. But they pitch this as equality and they market it well. It's really great propaganda, but what it really means is I'm taking all your shit.
Well, they market it as equity, and this is why it's actually so sinister, is because it's a Trojan horse in the sense where when people hear equity, they think their mind immediately goes to equality. This idea of equality that they've had in their minds for decades of equal opportunity.
Yes,
right?
Which I'm actually super good with.
Right.
Most normal people are.
But the difference between equality and equality of outcome and equity is but the difference between equality, which was thought of as equality of opportunity, and so this is what the average person thinks they're supporting, is equality of opportunity, but they Trojan horsed this equity word into there, which equity means equality of outcome. And that is a completely different idea than equality of opportunity.
Well, it's impossible.
Right.
You can't win that war. Everybody's different. Everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses. You can't possibly create the same outcome for any two people. It is impossible. Mm-hmm. But it's also not how the world works. The world needs to go back to a meritocracy. I'm sorry, it just is what it is. But I'm comfortable with that being for everybody, not just being like not favoring someone white who's black, who's this, who's that, who's marginalized. Just meritocracy across the board. Everybody just put in your work and get where you got to go. Yes, okay, some people can't pull up their socks. We have social programs. I'm super good with that. But the country was in a relatively decent place prior to all this divisive nonsense. Like when you're talking like early 2000s, things were good. People were not like, there may be some systemic issues you could point to, not nearly as much in Canada as there would be in the United States, but by and large, everything was good. Everyone was treated well. Everyone was treated equally. Yes, you can highlight isolated incidents, but the reality is at scale, shit was working. Now it is significantly worse because of all these terrible ideas.
Well, what's actually crazy is that even if you look, it was the World in Stats or whatever that our World in Data.
That's what it is.
One of that website. They did a whole survey across the world about racist beliefs, about being like, how would you feel about somebody that of another race living next to you? Mm-hmm. And our societies scored the lowest, in terms of racism. And then you go like, okay, so why are we hyperfixated? Why are we the only countries that are hyperfixated on racism when we're actually the
statistically the least racist?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
And we're going to bring the people in that are most racist.
Yes.
Actually, that is what's funny is, okay, you look at
you're onboarding their problems and bringing them here. In fact, okay, if we're already the least racist, the more people you bring in from countries that are racist, all you're doing is lowering our score, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're just actually, you're making it worse, liberals.
Well, and if you actually look at that that chart of the most racist countries, India is number one. So you go, okay, yeah, I believe they were number one. They're definitely near the top.
They're the largest population moving into this country right now.
Right.
700,000 last year.
In China was the second. You go, okay.
Yeah.
So we're shipping in the most racist people whilst claiming that we're inherently
It's kind of funny.
Racist.
It's like liberals, we need all these terrible ideas to fix the world. And it's like, it's this self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, you're actually going to create the problem. We might actually need these one day.
This is actually what's very interesting too, is it is kind of like it is funny. It's like a subconscious racist sentiment that a lot of like Westerners have when they even just say like, oh, Asian people, right? it's really funny because like Asia isn't a monolith in the sense where it's like, okay, you've got India, which is considered like South Asian,
Yeah.
but then you've got China, and those two groups don't like each other at
Hate
all.
each other.
China and India do not get along,
No.
especially as nations. Now, of course,
That's what I meant. Yeah.
of course, leaving room for the fact that individuals can get along. However, talking about groups and generalizing, India and China do not get along. And then you've also got, okay, other Asian groups, which would be, for instance, the Koreans and Japanese. And like both the Koreans and Japanese and Chinese do not get along, like mainly because Japan colonized both China and Korea in the early 1900s
Kinda
and
had it
late
coming then,
1800s.
yeah, got it.
And but it's like these cultures do not like each other, and then but we're just like Asians, they're the same. you're like no, there's actually a bunch of different groups of within this umbrella that you're putting as Asian. But either way, it is just crazy to me that it's like, okay, we've created this system that is hyper concerned with racism despite us being the least racist. But then also too, this just goes to this fact of, you know, you were talking about, okay, a meritocracy, and, you know, some people are inherently going to struggle like in the world. The difference is do we want every single person to struggle in order to try to save 10% of society, when the alternative is 90% of society can succeed, and then you have some social programs to support the 10%.
Yes.
But you've got 90% of people subsidizing 10% of people. But what's happening now is we're entering this world, and this is kind of an arbitrary number, but like, let's say it's 60% of the population is subsidizing 40%. And you go, oh, that if this keeps going on that trajectory, especially if you end up getting to a point where, let's say, you have 40% of people subsidizing 60% of the population, then like we're done. It's over.
It's interesting. This reminds me of a theory I have about communism and capitalism. If capitalism is working effectively, you've got, and this is just my own numbers are somewhat arbitrary, but it's what I believe. If capitalism is working effectively, 80% of your population can make their way. Sliding scale, people top 1%, people in the 80th percent, but 80% of the nation can make their way. The other 20% depend on social programs. This is when capitalism works effectively. Now, when you have crony capitalism and bad government policy, the number shifts. So it's not 20%, it's 30, then it's 40. It becomes more difficult. But here's the difference. When you employ communism, well, you have to find your common denominator in the bottom 50%. So all your top performers then suffer.
Right.
More than half the country has to suffer for this to work. And that's actually where I see it shifting. That's when you go too far with all these social programs, is you kill the system that actually works for the majority of people and can provide for the people that need social assistance. That is effective capitalism.
Yeah. Actually, even interestingly, even aside from economics, Brett Weinstein was, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting him here, but he's an evolutionary biologist, but he was talking about, okay, even on an organism front, that let's say you have three different types of like the same cell, but three different cells. The only way to make them equal is because like we don't know how to do this, is to make that one cell function better and essentially go up the ladder of performance to meet the others. Says the only way to really get equality in that situation is to put obstacles in front of the cells that are performing better than the weak.
Right.
And that's exactly what communism is, or socialism in a sense as well, is it's like you're not actually uplifting anybody, you're just pulling the top performers down.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it too.
All right, moving on to our last story. We've got COVID cover-up exposed. U.S. government blows the lid off of the lies and corruption. A 557-page White House report has confirmed what millions suspected. The COVID-19 pandemic response was riddled with lies, corruption, and cover-ups. From Fauci's fabricated lab leak denial to reckless NIH-funded gain-of-function research at Wuhan, the U.S. government prioritized narrative control over truth. Officials deleted records, misled the public, and censored dissent, while policies like lockdowns, mask mandates, and social distancing caused immense harm. The report reveals a global betrayal aided by the WHO and justified with politicized science. For Canadians who endured similar authoritarianism, this is a wake-up call. We need our own investigation because silence is complicity and truth is overdue. So how can nations like Canada protect against similar abuses of power in future health crises?
I have another list. Okay. Here's what we got to do. Establish an independent pandemic oversight body. So a group that will be able to oversee these things that is not connected to the government. I know that's challenging, but we need something like that. We need to enshrine transparency laws. So this would mandate the release of health data, scientific findings, and internal communications. So there's no more redactions or withheld information. We need to ban gain of function research. No shit. Can't believe we still do this stuff. Audit international affiliates like the WHO, who are significantly compromised by China, which we know. I just did that report. It's wild how not only how compromised they are, but they allowed the entire world to suffer for an extra 30 days when they knew that there was human-to-human transmission. But this data's out. They're 100% just towing the Chinese line. Wild to me.
And just remember, Tedros, the head of the WHO, was the health minister of Ethiopia's government, which was communist. So
Yes.
it's like he's ideologically aligned with China as well.
So dark. So we need to audit all the international affiliations we have. Throw the UN there as well. Criminalize deliberate misinformation by public officials. If you're a public official, you have a duty to uphold. You do not get to spread misinformation. Protect scientific dissent. This one's interesting because science became political science and it became very dogmatic through COVID, right? And anybody that actually had a degree, not just people like me, but people that were more educated, they were getting kicked off and censored on social media for just being like, hey, this doesn't make sense, right? So you have to protect scientific dissent. Limit emergency powers. Crazy that they were able to pull those. Definitely have to find a way to limit those. Restore civil liberties frameworks. So for me, we went way overboard. I know you can use the emergency measures, but it was other things too, right? It was, you couldn't be outside, you couldn't go to the park, you couldn't be in the car with someone that wasn't from your home. They could pull you over and just basically ID you for this stuff. It got really wild here for a little while. So we need to reel that in. We should launch a full public inquiry into Canada's pandemic response. I bet that would be nasty, but I think we need to do it. Empower citizens with information. So this a little bit kind of goes back to enshrining the transparency laws, but the public needs the information. We all need to know what's going on, right? So at the end of the day, your government is supposed to impose the will of the people. That's the whole idea. And if you're not giving us the information, then we don't know what we want. You're just doing whatever you want behind closed doors. I disagree with it completely. And finally, strengthen local health autonomy. This kind of goes back to something I was saying earlier in the original topic. I just think we need to give our provinces more control over their own domain. I really do. I think it really, really should be more like the United States. So I think if we do that, we can avoid, sort of the same debacle all over again.
You know what? I don't even think it needs to be that there's an independent body that oversees the pandemic response, but that there's essentially a communication portal between different public health officials, or not even public health officials, sorry, but like doctors and practitioners. Because if you really wanted to solve that pandemic, what you would do is create obviously a more advanced version, but like a chat room for all these doctors and allow them to do what they see best with their patients, allow them to use their expertise. And then you would allow them to go, okay, I tried this approach, it didn't work, or I tried this approach and it did work. And then you would allow people to essentially like a marketplace of ideas, right, within health. But instead what we had was one organization that dictated every single policy. And again, I've really talked about this a lot recently, but it's like those were military directives. Those were biological warfare frameworks that were used. So it wasn't even really science. It was military operations. But if we want things to operate better in the future, I think they actually have to be professional medical professionals that are trying to figure out what's going on, which wasn't the case here. But then also too, when it comes to this, like there needs to be consequences. People need to go to jail for this for life. Like if you think about it on any other issue, like if you kill someone, well, you go to jail for life. Like you're not allowed out, or at least 25 years, right? But okay, then you get something like this where you go, oh, we had public health officials that were collaborating on bioweapons research with the Chinese military and shipping over dangerous viruses to China. And also, even they were taking their, what looks like, even you look at all of these organizations, right? The WHO, which said, okay, we're using, like our governments were like, we need to listen to these international bodies. Well, those international bodies were being given their directives by China. Even you looked at World Economic Forum at the time was saying like China is the model. They're doing this the best. Their response has been the best. The Bill Gateses of the world and all of this kind of stuff. So you had our public health officials taking their marching orders from China. And so you go, you need to have people face consequences for this, because otherwise you're just incentivizing it to continue happening. If psychopaths, which these people are, know that they can just do this again, like even let's say it's the next generation of psychopaths waiting in the wing to take over the government. If they know that, oh, I can do whatever the hell I want, something as crazy as COVID, and I'm going to just get some minor public backlash and then go off and retire on a taxpayer funded salary and nothing's ever going to happen to me, then like, what do you think that incentivizes?
Okay, so two things. I totally agree that we need to have significant accountability. I'd say that was definitely missing on the list. That is super important. I think people need to hang for this 100%, figuratively. And that it will disincentivize people to do similar things in the future. Absolutely on the same page there. Now, with the independent pandemic oversight body, you touched on something. You said, well, we should just have a group chat room, and to sort of dumb down your idea. But here's the thing. If you don't have an independent oversight body, how do you make sure that that there is a chat room and that the information is being shared, and that you don't have a tyrannical government or a tyrannical organization within this thing that is sort of doing whatever they want and trying to lead the way, like the military? Which is why I think if you have an oversight body, it's one more tripwire. It's one more way to sort of guarantee that it doesn't get out of hand.
Well, that's the thing is like, you can have the independent oversight body, but it's more so just like, let's say it's a
it's a nonpartisan arm's length agency is how I would see it.
Yeah, but let's say they're the one coordinating the communications, but they're not directing policy. Their job is to essentially make sure that all of these professionals can...
Oh, they have nothing to do with policy. No. They're a third-party organization that all they do is they make sure that no one else is breaking the rules. That's all they're the referee. That's what we need, a referee, because they can be compromised too, and you can argue, but you have to build in these tripwires. For me, they're the ultimate referee. And I think, in my opinion, the best way to do that is that you have people that would have to be selected at the time of when you needed it. So this is kind of a broken idea, but just bear with me. If you know who's on the independent pandemic oversight body, if you already know who's on it, they can be compromised, right? But it's kind of like jury duty. Not quite the same. You have to meet a qualification. Right. But what you do is you'd be like, okay, 25 people are going to be selected. If you are in this field, or if you are an MP, or if you're a senator, if you fall under one of these categories, you're now one of the people that may be picked for this. You know what I mean? And that way, it's like at the time of, hey, we need this body, bang, they're picked. So they can't be compromised, or at least not everybody can be.
I actually think that's a decent way to go about a lot of public office, even outside of the pandemic talk, is just being like, okay, let's say that you look at it as it's a public duty, like jury duty, where on short time frames, let's say it's like 2 years, you still get paid or whatever, but you're taking that position, and because then even, okay, let's say you have nefarious actors that are wanting to compromise these institutions. Well, for them to compromise those individuals, that's a very high investment.
Yes.
And they don't actually get the reward. But when you've got these people that can sit in office for decades, then yeah, once you corrupt them, you've got them for life. And you've got
Nancy Pelosi.
You've got that organization, or even whether it be like, say, the CBSA, like the border agency.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, well, if I corrupt one of the management level people at the CBSA,
who's there for 25 years,
who's there for 25 years,
I'm good.
I've got this organization for life.
Yeah, totally agreed. Yeah, good call.
And so you need more essentially movement within those organizations.
100%.
All right, anything else you wanted to add today?
That is everything.
Don't forget to head over to our Substack, where you can sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 5 days a week. That's blendrnews.substack.com, BLENDR news.substack.com. You can also pick up a Death by Taxes hoodie to support the show if you would like. It helps keep this engine going, and we'll catch you next time.